Welcome to Temple of the Human Heart, where love is the doctrine, compaction is the practice, awakening is the work. Here we seek first the kingdom within. As you return to yourself, what was fragmented begins to gather again.
Welcome to the Temple of the Human Heart. I am Yisra'el Apriale, your compass, teaching you to navigate yourself back to your human heart. Here, love is the doctrine, compassion is the practice, and awakening is the work. Our foundational message is simple. Seek first the kingdom within, and as you return to yourself, what was fragmented begins to gather again. Today's lesson is the great forgetting. We are in week 2 of the Temple series about awakening and returning to yourself. Last week we talked about why the temple exists. Today I want to talk about something that I believe every human being experiences at some point in life. The great forgetting. No, I'm not talking about forgetting facts or names or where you left your keys. I'm talking about forgetting yourself, forgetting your worth, forgetting your voice, forgetting your humanity, and forgetting the kingdom within. And if I'm honest, this sermon is not just something I studied. It's something I am living. So let's talk about my story. Through abuse and trauma, I spent many years trying to become the person I thought society would finally accept. I couldn't align through my body because I never seemed to fit the standards that I believe were required. So I tried to align through achievement. I educated myself. I had a tremendous work ethic. I was already really dependable and really responsible because of the stuff that I had to accomplish as a child. I had to grow up really, really fast. So those things, the dependability, responsibility, and the accountability I learned as a young child because I had to take care of my sisters and I had so much trauma and things going on in my life as a child. But through it all, I became the person everyone could count on. I became the person who kept going, who kept showing up, who worked harder, and who climbed. Because somewhere deep inside, I believed that if I climbed high enough, if I achieved enough, if I accomplished enough, eventually I would reach a place that proved all the doubters wrong. I would finally become somebody. The problem was that every achievement created another mountain. Every accomplishment created another finish line. And every success moved the goalpost. And while I was becoming successful on the outside, I was becoming exhausted on the inside. Because I was not building a life, I was building a defense system. I was trying to outrun rejection. I was trying to outwork debt. Debt and doubt. I was trying to outwork doubt is the word I was looking for. I was trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided who I was. And then what I eventually discovered was that the importance I was seeking could never be found through comparison. The appreciation I wanted could never be earned through performance. It arrived when I finally acknowledged my own achievements. When I stopped measuring my life against someone else's ruler. And when I stopped asking, am I enough for them? And I started asking myself, am I honoring myself? That was that was the beginning of remembrance. That was the beginning of my awakening. And that was the moment I began coming back to myself. So one of my foundational scriptures that I point to over and over again about remembrance was the Prodigal Son. In Luke 15:17, he said, and when he came to himself, or the text said rather, and when he came to himself. And when I read that, I was like, he came to himself. So just to paraphrase the story of the prodigal son, there was a son that asked his father for his inheritance early. And his father did not question what he wanted to do with the inheritance. He didn't fight him on it. He said, okay, and gave it to him. And with whatever inheritance it was, he was able to live lavishly. He was able to go and spend money freely and do what he wanted to do. But then when the money ran out, he found himself in a pig pen, cleaning up pigs' mess and being envious of the fact that the pigs had something to eat. He was envious of what they were eating also, because he was like, they're eating well for pigs. But then he remembered who he was. The text says, and when he came to himself. And when we think about it, at this point, you're cleaning a pig pen. You've lost direction. You've lost perspective. But then the text says something remarkable. He came to himself. It does not say he found God. It does not say he found religion. It doesn't say he found a new identity. It says he came to himself. Something had been forgotten. Something had been lost. Something had become buried beneath survival, choices, distractions, and circumstances. And the turning point of the story is not the return home. The turning point is the remembrance. He remembered, why am I sitting here suffering when my father takes care of his laborers? My father takes care of everybody in his household. So why am I sitting here in a pig pen when I remember who I am? He came to himself. The second scripture that I want to focus on this lesson is the Gospel of Thomas. We're going to talk about saying number 3. And keep in mind, if you want to go and research this verse or this text, you can go to gnosis.org, which is the Nag Hammadi library, is where the ancient texts were located. So the Gospel of Thomas saying 3 says, the kingdom is inside of you and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will realize that it is you who are the children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty. But I want you to notice the connection between Luke 15 and 17 when we focus on the text, he came to himself. And then this text from the Gospel of Thomas, know yourselves. Both teachings point in the same direction, that the spiritual journey is not simply about finding answers, it's about remembering who you are. So let's look at our different lenses. We're going to first take on the historical lens. Throughout history, humanity has searched for meaning. People have crossed deserts, built temples, created religions, followed teachers, and even searched sacred texts. That's definitely the one I've chased down. Yet one of the oldest spiritual teachings repeatedly points inward. The kingdom is within. Know yourself. Come to yourself. Remember yourself. This theme appears again and again because the human struggle has remained the same. We lose ourselves. So how can we look at this symbolically? The great forgetting is not an event. It's a process. A child enters the world whole. They're curious, they're creative, they're expressive, they're unapologetic. And then life begins to speak to them. Our parents speak to us. Culture, religion, relationship, trauma, rejection. And then soon we begin collecting identities. Oh, they're the smart one. Oh, he's the strong one. Yep, he's a responsible one. She's the people pleaser, the perfectionist. We become the caretaker, the achiever. And I want you to understand that none of these roles are necessarily bad. But eventually we began confusing the role with the person. And that is where forgetting begins. So I want to go back to what Thomas said on the first line. The kingdom is inside of you and it's outside of you. So when we start looking at and it's outside of you, the kingdom is also reflected in what we create, in relationships, the beauty, in nature, in truth, in those acts of love, those moments of compassion. The same reality that exists within is reflected without. And a lot of mystics teach as within, so without. We're going to also look at the psychological lens. Most people spend years trying to discover who they are through external sources. We chase titles because we've forgotten our worth. We seek validation because we've forgotten our voice. We overwork because we've forgotten we are enough. The false self is often nothing more than the version of us that learned how to survive. The true self is the part that existed before survival became necessary. I'm going to say that again. The true self is the part that existed before survival became necessary. But I want you to sit and I want you to think about that part. Because as I'm thinking about it, as I'm saying it, I'm realizing survival was something I had to learn as a child. Because there's so much abuse and there's so much happening to me as a child that I don't think I know my true self, because I don't know who that person was before I had to learn to survive. And here is where we reflect, because that is what I need to work on. My true self. Who was I, or who was I supposed to be before survival became my identity? Because that's what happened to me. Survival became my identity. And the great forgetting happens when survival becomes your identity. Now I got to stop and take a minute and think about that and reflect on that myself. But let's keep going. All right, so temple reflection. This is why success alone cannot heal us. Money cannot heal forgetting. Recognition cannot heal forgetting. Relationships, followers. Because the wound is not outside. The wound is separation from ourselves. And I want you to, keep in mind that that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying money's a bad thing. I'm not saying recognition, relationships, followers. I am not saying that they're bad things, but those things that we make our identities can help us, can lead us to forgetting who we are. Especially when those things become the wounds, because those wounds keep us separated from ourselves. And anything outside of us becomes an impossible burden when we expect it to tell us who we are. Anything outside of us, if we have that expectation, I'm going to do this and this is going to make me great. I'm going to do this and that thing is going to make me great. That is something outside of you. It's outside of you. So let's look at it from an awakening lens. Luke nor the Gospel of Thomas doesn't tell us to become someone new. Both verses tell us to know ourselves. Perhaps awakening begins the moment we stop searching for ourselves in the opinions of others. Again, when you come to know yourselves, when we go back to the Gospel of Thomas, saying 3, when you come to know yourself, notice that the text does not say when you learn more information, when you memorize more scripture, when you attend more services, or even when you become more religious. What it does say is that awakening begins with self-recognition. The prodigal son came to himself. He remembered who he was. The son, I'm going to say man because it's described son, was in a pig pen cleaning up pig filth. And you already know, just off of background information, that the Israelites had something with the pigs. You know, it is the Jesus put the spirit in the pigs. Pigs is slop. You're not supposed to eat anything from pigs. So we know that he was at his lowest because he was cleaning up the pig pen. And he came to himself. He remembered, hey, what am I doing? I'm the son of such and such. I'm finna go home. Thomas says, know yourselves. And just looking at both of those verses, both of them point toward remembrance. Not acquisition, not becoming, not acquisition and not becoming, but remembering. So let's go to the most challenging line for the Gospel of Thomas, because we talked about poverty, but I want you to understand that it's not financial poverty. All right. So, but if you do not know yourselves, then you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty. And again, we're not thinking about money. In this context, we're thinking about spiritual poverty. And there's a poverty of identity, a poverty of self-awareness, a poverty of connection and remembering. Because you can have money and still be poor in spirit. You can have followers and still not know yourself. You can have influence and still be disconnected from your own heart. So I want you to think about this. What if the greatest poverty in the world is not a lack of money? What if it's forgetting who you are? Because once you forget who you are, you will spend your whole life trying to become what everyone else wants you to be. And perhaps that is the beginning of the great forgetting. Or as the prodigal son discovered, the journey home begins the moment you come to yourself. So let's talk about returning. What I want you to understand is the temple does not teach that you are broken. But what we do teach is that you have forgotten. We don't teach that you're unworthy. And I want to be clear with this. We do not teach that you're unworthy. But we will teach that you have forgotten your worth. We do not teach that you need to become someone else. But we do teach that you need to remember. And remembering includes your voice, your humanity, your courage, compassion, and remember the kingdom within. Because every awakening begins with remembrance. And every return begins with coming back to yourself. All right, so this is our affirmation, and I want you to repeat after me. I release the identities I created to survive. I release the need to prove my worth. I release comparison. I release performance. I remember my voice. I remember my value. I remember my humanity. I remember the kingdom within. And as I return to myself, what was fragmented begins to gather again. I want to thank you for joining me for another temple session. If today's message resonated with you, share it with someone who may be searching for their way back to themselves. You may visit us at www.awakenandreturn.com. If you would like to connect with the temple directly, you can reach us at info@awakenandreturn.com. Until next time, continue the work of awakening. Continue the work of remembering. and continue the journey back to your human heart. I'm Yisra'el Apriale, and I'll meet you again inside the temple.